So I can't believe I'm saying this already, but summer is wrapping up, at least where I live. So what that means is that it's a perfect time to wrap up the dark fiction I've been reading recently. And as I've talked about all throughout the last couple months, I've really been in a bit of a reading slump. Just the hot weather does not necessarily make me feel like reading. I feel like doing other things, getting outside, etc. And good news for reading, it's getting colder here, and I have at least done some reading as the summer has stretched on. So I'm going to talk about a lot of the books I've been reading, most of them thrillers. And if that sounds good, let's get started. First, let's talk about thrillers, starting with Everyone Here Is Lying by Shari Lapena. This is one that I highlighted in my July TBR video because I wanted to read more Canadian authors and found out that one of my favorite thriller authors happens to also be Canadian. Win-win, at least for myself. And so in this one, it's technically following multiple perspectives, but it starts out from the perspective of this family man, this husband and father who at the beginning of the story is having an affair. It starts to fall apart in the first scene, and then he comes home and is dealing with his daughter, and then she mysteriously goes missing later. And so it's a setup of a book where the father naturally is going to look very concerning, and from his perspective, we already know he's lying, he's already keeping secrets, and then his daughter goes missing. They have this blow up before she goes missing, and quite frankly, it looks quite bad. This is one where it shifts around different perspectives, and as the title suggests, and I think this is really where the book shines, is the fact that everyone has secrets and baggage, and there very much is that shifting of perspective and shifting of who looks guilty, who looks like they might be behind it all. And it was interesting to piece together. This is one I ended up reading during a camping trip, and I was in a really slumpy mood that weekend. I just wanted to read because we had so much time. We were putting away our phones and enjoying nature, but I couldn't find anything that would actually hold my attention. I DNF'd so many books, and this is finally the book that held my attention. So I do think, again, if you're really in that slumpy mood where, again, you want to read, because if you don't want to read, just do something else. But I genuinely wanted to read, and finally this book held my attention. I'll say that I found the first half stronger than the second, which is a little bit disappointing because usually half the fun of a thriller is a really punchy ending. And in my mind, it started more interesting with all of these pieces and everyone having their secrets. And then how it all came together was a little bit less exciting than the suspense of getting there, if that makes sense. Needless to say, it was a page turner, fast and easy to get through. But if you are new to this author, I would recommend picking up one of her other books because she has books that I think are so much stronger than this one. It was fine, but definitely not the 4 or 5 star read I was hoping to get from this one. But again, it pulled me out of a reading slump for a moment, which is definitely something worth noting by itself. Next up is Give Me Your Hand by Abbott, which is a thriller that follows a woman who back in high school made good friends with another girl through chemistry class. They both continued on through the sciences and now are working in the same field themselves. And within the story, they are both friends, but then there's also a position or aspect of competition as they are both vying for the same positions in the small research field, especially in a place where, at least within the framework of the story, is not always very welcoming to women. And there is a major thriller piece to the story that I don't want to spoil, so I am definitely leaving a major aspect of the plot out. This is a book that explores a lot of interesting topics in very complicated ways, and the author is trying to do a lot in a small book, which, as I even tried to describe this on camera, is just difficult to do because I think she was trying to accomplish a lot and I'm not sure she necessarily nailed everything. So with a book centered around females in the science fields, there's definitely conversations about the challenges that come with those careers, and so you play into that aspect. There's also conversations around women and their hormonal cycle, which is normally something I don't like to touch in my books or see there, but there's some interesting conversations around how it can be something that's seen as really holding women back, or the struggles that a lot of women have with it and so forth. And there's just lots going on. It definitely is a female-centric book. I don't think the author is doing much to really try to draw in a male audience. So I know quite a few of my audience is male. I'm certainly not telling you not to read this book, but just know that the author is definitely writing to a specific group and is very targeted in doing so. So I really like what this author is trying to do within this book, but I'll be honest, in terms of plot, it doesn't entirely come together. That being said, I really like this author's writing. I like the topics that she tries to tackle. I find her a little bit edgy, a little bit off the beaten path, and I find that while she writes in commercial spaces, especially today as she gets more popular, I still find that she does things a little bit unexpected and really pushes the boundaries. And so she is a favorite author of mine, even though I don't always give her books the highest rating, which is a strange thing to say. I'd love to know if anyone else has favorite authors that don't necessarily write their favorite books. And that's definitely the case here. There is so much she's doing right. There's so much I love about the kind of stories that she wants to put out in the universe that I keep coming back. And so she is a favorite author with a lot of caveats, if that makes sense. And also by Megan Abbott, I read The End of Everything. Basically, after finishing that book, I really want to go revisit another book that I read from her many years ago, right when I started this booktube channel. I don't think anyone was watching back then. And so this is one where we follow a young girl who has this best friend, or at least had. She mysteriously disappears, and then the main character, this young girl that we're following the story from, is then trying to investigate, figure out what happens, and she believes that her best friend might have gone away with this older man, and so she ends up going and kind of pursuing that same individual, and the story goes on from there. This one is largely uncomfortable. I actually only gave it 2.5 stars the first time I read it, but it's a kind of book that, even though I remember giving it that rating, it's also the kind of book that has been kind of lingering in the back of my head for many years, and I really wanted to revisit it, especially as I've grown as a reader, and really see what I think about it. Because again, Megan Abbott is an author who I don't necessarily give 5 stars to, I think, any of her books, but I keep going back to them. There's something about the stories she writes, the characters, and particularly her prose, that has a quality to it that keeps drawing me back, and that's very much the case here. What I think is the challenge with this book is that it's really hard to tell who this book is written for, because the main character is so young that by its nature you would think this book would be a young adult book, but for the sake of what this book is in terms of the subject matter and some of the very adult topics that are explored within this book, it's a coming-of-age story, but it feels like it's written through the naivety of a young girl and very much written for that audience, except then it goes again to very adult, mature places that would be completely inappropriate to give to a young person. And so I do feel like this is a book that really suffers from not knowing who it's written for in that regard. I have to look. I think my library even shelves it as young adult, which I think is a big mistake. But again, if it's meant to be that coming of age narrative written, I would have liked the book to be framed around an older perspective, where you have someone looking back at their childhood and recognizing their innocence at that time. Instead, this book kind of walks that uncomfortable line where you have a character who is clearly very immature, and we as the reader, as an adult, it's hard in some ways to read this book because again, it's diving into topics that are very strange and not for everyone. I really can't widely recommend this book, and it's really hard, quite frankly, to talk about on camera. But the prose of this book is fantastic. It has some really interesting character work. Again, very much this young girl trying to sort out herself and the feelings that she's having, and all of these things she's dealing with that are well above the things that she should have to worry about at her age, and it makes for a very uncomfortable reading experience. But I still think that there are good things that this book is trying to do. I really wish that this book had been more polished, more focused. Again, I think with a stronger editor who would have pushed the author to have a stronger position on this book. Instead, it's kind of this murky gray area where reading it is uncomfortable because you're not quite sure what the author is trying to say with what she's doing within the story, if that makes sense. Where I feel like other books, like say My Dark Vanessa, that deal with certain topics, do it in such a clear way that it can be uncomfortable, but you feel safe within the author's hands that she's not going to go to places and breach that trust of the author to reader relationship, where Megan Abbott is a little bit unwieldy in how she tells her stories, and you find yourself wondering where the heck is the story going along the way. So she's one that I think does a lot of things right, but at the end of the day, it's very much a book that's hard to recommend. And even as I try to discuss it on camera, quite frankly, I'm struggling because while there's pieces of it I like, I think there are a lot of things that really need to be reworked in order for this book to be widely recommended, or even narrowly recommended, because she is trying to attempt really ambitious things, and I'm not quite sure what she was trying to say in the way that she presented the story. So I still don't think I recommend this one, but it was definitely one that I had to revisit and try to figure it out the second time around, which I'm not sure if I did or not. All right, moving on. Next we have The Crash by Freida McFadden, and this is the thriller story that follows a woman who at the beginning of the story, this is all in the setup, finds out that she is pregnant. The father of that child does not want to be involved. They really weren't in a relationship, and so they make arrangements for her to be taken care of as long as she keeps the pregnancy and the identity of the father safe and quiet. And then within the story, she goes through a snowstorm. So really, I don't know why I consider this to be a summer thriller. It's not. This would be a great one to read during the winter months if you do have snow in your area there. And so instead, you're following her during this great snowstorm. Something happens, and then she ends up getting rescued by these individuals, and you're starting to wonder as the story progresses, what is everyone's motivations behind it? Is she saved, or is this just the start of something else? So this is one that very much mirrors a lot of very classic tropes of the thriller genre, where you have someone who is taken away to be taken care of by other individuals, but there is more going on, and it's very much a story that has multiple twists and turns and moves along the way. My big issue with this one is how it handles pregnancy, or particularly infertility, and those that suffer from it. I really dislike the representation. Not that you can't have complicated characters, but I really feel like the author just felt like she was very insensitive to some of the things she was writing about, and leaned heavily into some stereotypes about certain women that I found to be very annoying and nagging. I had issues with this one, and it's kind of a story where once you get annoyed with it, or at least this is me, once I get annoyed with a book, I can't stop picking at it, and so I started picking it apart. It's one that I actually kind of had fun at the beginning. I was kind of intrigued, and then I was pretty much hate reading by the end. So it's very much a me problem. I think otherwise it's a pretty standard familiar story with some fairly predictable twists and turns, but what really got me is, again, how it chose to use the plot device of pregnancy and those that are in other situations, and kind of some of the roles and stereotypes that it put certain female characters into just really bothered me, and particularly the ending, and the fact that the author chose to write a particular ending that really bothered me at the end of the day, and just again felt very insensitive, hand-waving, and the kind of ending that sounds like a good idea in paper if you don't think about it too hard, and then once you start thinking about it, you realize what a terrible ending that is. And that's kind of how I felt. So I got salty with this one. I've enjoyed other books by this author. I know she's very hit or miss in the community, and this one, in my opinion, is definitely on the miss side, so don't recommend. I also read My Darlings by Marie Still, and this is a story that follows a woman who is of a very wealthy background, and you find out right at the beginning of the story, from the very setup, it's on the synopsis, all of that, not a spoiler, is that you find out that she herself is a psychopath and an active serial killer. And so within the story, there are women who are going missing, and then of course being found murdered, and then she is all responsible for that. It's very much a plot that I feel like was very exciting when they first started coming out, these female serial killer type psychopath stories that were getting brought into the mainstream several years back. At this point, I feel like it's a genre that's kind of been overdone. I think it's hard to do it right because it's hard to write a really believable main character. You're writing a character who is naturally going to be unlikable, but somehow you need to cheer for her or have some connection, or at least want her to be brought down and be at least invested enough in the story, even if you're writing for this really horrific perspective. And then there's also, of course, the sensitivity. While this is all, of course, fiction, very much, I think you're reading the story from a very voyeuristic way, which I think, even for myself, kind of was very bothersome, because again, I felt like the author was perhaps wanting us to sympathize with her. As the story progresses, you learn more about maybe why she does what she does and different things. And for me, it's a story that was a really fast page turner. I was, again, really slumpy, and this one was one that I flew through, but as I was reading it, I could actively tell that I wasn't really loving it and wasn't really invested in the story, and was noticing lots of flaws, lots of things that I didn't love about it, but I kept reading anyway. So if you're looking for a fast page turner, you might want to pick this one up. If you're someone who loves this kind of subgenre, you might want to pick this up. If you're looking for a well-done story that has great prose, all of that, I don't think you'll necessarily find that here. The characters felt very flat, very stereotypical. And also I should mention that this book centers around really privileged women who are all ultra rich. And certainly that's kind of part of the point, is this destruction of this elite culture. But it's also not necessarily really fun to read, I think, especially in this economy where most of us are not in that situation, that I think a lot of us are just really tired about reading about ultra rich people and would rather read about people perhaps more like us and more relatable in terms of the lifestyle that they're bringing into the story. So overall, I didn't really love this one, but I also read it in a day because it was really fast to get through. And I don't even want to say addicting. It was just an easy book to fly through, even if I actually thought it had a lot of flaws. So kind of recommend it, not really, but sometimes you pick up books because you just want to get back into the habit of reading, even if the book itself is not that great. So that's it for this video here. I'd love to know the books I talked about, which ones are you planning checking out for yourself? And of course, while I'm really sad to see the end of summer coming very quickly, I'm also looking forward to the fact that I'm going to dive deep into my fall TBR. I have some really good books coming up and some really good videos planned and scheduled. So hopefully you stick around, subscribe if you haven't yet, hit that little notification bell so you never miss a video. If you enjoyed this one, give me a thumbs up, drop a comment, even just an emoji. It lets me know you're here. Otherwise, I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.